The package arrived on a night as black and starless as Gabriel Thorne's soul. Rain lashed against the grimy window panes of his isolated cabin, a fitting soundtrack to the constant gnawing emptiness within him. The courier, a gaunt, shivering man who looked as though he'd seen too many forgotten roads, merely dropped the oilskin-wrapped bundle and fled without a word. Gabriel knew, even before he unfastened the twine. He knew it in the sudden, icy tremor that snaked up his spine, a sensation he hadn't felt since the day his world shattered. He placed the package on the scarred wooden table, the light from a single flickering oil lamp casting long, dancing shadows that mimicked the chaos in his mind. With a practiced hand, he unwrapped the canvas. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were two objects. The first was a silver crucifix, once gleaming, now tarnished a deep, unholy black, as if it had been dipped in tar and left to fester. It was Father Alistair's, Gabriel's mentor, his confessor, the only man who had ever shown him true kindness within the rigid, unforgiving confines of the Ordo Malleus. The second object made Gabriel's breath catch in his throat, a raw, involuntary gasp that tasted of ash and bile. It was a piece of human skin, freshly flayed, still disturbingly supple, the size of his palm. Upon its pale, almost translucent surface, a symbol had been tattooed in intricate, spidery lines of what looked like dried blood. It was a sigil Gabriel knew intimately, a mark etched into the deepest, darkest corners of his memory. The seal of Malachor, the Duke of Shards and Flies. Malachor. The name was a whisper of a forgotten nightmare, a promise of unspeakable agony. It was the archdemon that had claimed the child, the innocent host Gabriel had been forced to destroy with his own hands, the act that had ripped his faith to shreds and exiled him from the Order. Alistair had vanished weeks ago. He'd been investigating a resurgence of demonic energy, a festering blight emanating from a place Gabriel had hoped he would never have to think about again, the monastery of the Ashen Crown. The monastery, a monument to ecclesiastical depravity, perched like a broken tooth on the craggy peaks of the Italian Alps. It was a place where perpetual winter held sway, where the very stones were said to groan with ancient suffering, and the walls wept black, oily tears during the harshest storms. Its history was steeped in heresy, the stronghold of a 15th century inquisitor who, in his twisted zeal, had embraced the very darkness he claimed to fight. Gabriel's fingers traced the demonic seal on the flayed skin. This wasn't a message. It was a declaration. Alistair was not just in danger. He was a pawn, a sacrifice, and Malachor was involved. His faith was gone, a hollowed-out cavern where God once resided. But his belief in demons remained, a cold, hard certainty forged in blood and despair. And his loyalty to Alistair, the man who had seen the tortured soul beneath the hardened exterior, transcended even the bitter ashes of his faith. He had abandoned the Ordo Malleus, forsaken his vows, but the tools of his trade, the forbidden knowledge he had acquired, remained. He was a weapon, honed and tempered in the crucible of hell's own fires, now unleashed by a terrible personal vendetta. He packed with the efficiency of a man preparing for war. Silver-tipped stakes, vials of holy oil he no longer believed in but kept out of habit, a consecrated blade he knew would be less effective than a well-placed bullet, and most importantly, his worn leather-bound grimoire. It was filled not with prayers, but with the true names of demons, the rituals of binding, the dark lore of infernal hierarchy. Knowledge that the Order deemed too dangerous for anyone but their highest echelons. Knowledge that had cost him everything, and might now be his only salvation. The journey was a blur of driving rain, winding mountain roads, and the gnawing dread that tightened its grip with every mile. The monastery of the Ashen Crown loomed into view through the swirling mists of dawn, a skeletal silhouette against a bruised purple sky. It was larger, more imposing than he remembered. Its non-Euclidean angles and disproportionate arches, giving it the unsettling appearance of something built not by man, but by a mad god. A deep fissure split the mountain face below the monastery, a raw, jagged wound that seemed to exhale a perpetual frigid breath. This was the weak point. The place where the veil between worlds was thinnest, where the dark rituals of the Inquisitor had once drawn power from the abyss. Gabriel parked his battered Land Rover a mile down the treacherous path, opting for a silent, unseen approach. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of damp earth, decaying stone, and something else, a faint, metallic tang, like old blood. The main gate hung ajar, a twisted maw inviting him into the dark maw of the beast. The heavy oak doors, once reinforced with iron, were now splintered and warped, revealing glimpses of the unholy rituals within. The courtyard was choked with weeds, and the ancient paving stones were slick with a black, oily sheen, even though no rain had fallen here for days. It was the weeping of the monastery, the first sign of Malakor's insidious presence. As he moved through the deserted cloisters, his senses sharpened, every shadow a potential threat, every creak of the old stones a warning. The silence was unnerving, a heavy blanket that muffled even the sound of his own breathing. And then, a sound, a faint, desperate moan. He followed the sound to the scriptorium, a vast hall where countless ancient texts now lay scattered and ruined, their pages rotting, their bindings gnawed by unseen things. Huddled in a corner, amidst the decaying parchment, was a figure. It was a young man, cloaked in the simple robes of a monk, shivering violently. He was terribly thin, his face a pale mask of fear, eyes wide and haunted. "Please," the monk whimpered, cowering as Gabriel approached. "Don't hurt me. I'm Silas. I'm the last caretaker." Gabriel's hand went to the hilt of his blade, his eyes narrowing. He trusted no one, especially not in a place like this. "Where are the others, Silas? What happened here?" Silas shuddered, wrapping his arms around himself. They came. Men in black robes. They killed Father Thomas. The others, they were dragged away. I hid. I've been hiding for days. They're summoning something. Something terrible. His voice was thin, reedy, laced with genuine terror. Gabriel studied him, searching for tells, for the subtle signs of deception he had learned to recognize in the countless cultists and possessed he had encountered. Silas seemed genuine, a victim, emaciated and weak, barely able to stand. A useful guide, perhaps. "My mentor, Father Alistair," Gabriel said, his voice low and guttural. "Is he here?" Silas nodded, his eyes welling up with tears. "Yes, they have him, in the sanctum inversum, deep beneath the chapel. They're going to use him. For the summoning." A cold spike of dread pierced Gabriel's heart. "Show me!" Silas hesitated for a moment, then slowly pushed himself to his feet. As he moved, Gabriel noticed a subtle, unsettling fluidity to his limbs, as if his joints bent a little too far, a little too easily. And as Silas turned, a flicker of movement in the corner of Gabriel's eye, a brief, almost imperceptible shift in the shadows. Silas's shadow seemed to detach itself, just for a split second, then snapped back into alignment with a sickening shudder. Gabriel dismissed it as a trick of the flickering lamplight and his own heightened paranoia. He had to save Alistair. "It's dangerous," Silas whispered, leading the way with a tentative gait. "They have guards. And the darkness. It's growing." They navigated the labyrinthine corridors, the air growing colder, heavier, charged with a palpable evil. The monastery was a place of decay. Tapestries rotted on the walls, revealing murals of grotesque, fanged devils beneath. Stained glass windows were shattered, letting in only a sickly gray light. The black, oily substance Gabriel had seen in the courtyard now streaked the walls, dripping from gargoyles that seemed to leer with newly awakened malice. As they descended deeper, the signs of Malicor's influence became more pronounced. Patches of wall suddenly erupted with obsidian-like shards, splintering with a sound like breaking bones. Swarms of fat, black flies, unnaturally silent, began to appear, buzzing erratically around the dripping oil, congregating on the decaying surfaces. Gabriel felt a prickling sensation on his skin. He remembered this, the precursor. Malicor was near. He glanced at Silas, who was now shivering uncontrollably, his pale face slick with sweat. As the young monk moved, a few of the black flies, larger and more sluggish than normal, seemed to crawl out from beneath the collar of his robes, buzzing lazily for a moment before disappearing back into the folds of his garment. Gabriel's brow furrowed, but he kept his focus on the path ahead. They encountered their first cultist in a long, vaulted passage. He was a hulking brute, clad in black robes, brandishing a rusty cleaver. He moved with a fanatic's single-minded devotion, his eyes wide and bloodshot. Gabriel didn't hesitate. His blade, a blackened steel weapon forged in ancient fires, moved with blinding speed. He parried the cleaver, the clash of metal echoing deafeningly, then twisted, driving the point of his weapon into the cultist's throat. The man gurgled, a fountain of dark blood erupting, and collapsed. Silas screamed, a thin, high-pitched sound. "He's dead! You killed him!" "He would have killed us," Gabriel retorted, wiping blood from his blade with a piece of cloth. "Are you with me or against me, Silas?" The monk whimpered again, clutching his chest. "With you. Always with you. Just don't look at me like that." They pressed on, the air growing thick with the buzzing of flies and the oppressive stench of decay. The path led them through a crypt, where ancient sarcophagi lay open, their contents disturbed. Gabriel recognized the signs of desecration, bones arranged in ritualistic patterns, symbols scrawled in blood on the stone. Suddenly, Silas stumbled. Gabriel reached out to steady him, and his hand brushed against the monk's arm. Beneath the thin cloth, Gabriel felt a disturbing texture, not flesh and bone, but something chitinous. And then, an intense wave of revulsion as a cluster of flies burst from Silas's sleeve, spiraling upwards with a frantic buzz. Gabriel recoiled, his eyes blazing with a terrible realization. Silas wasn't just terrified. He was time's tainted asterisk. His emaciation wasn't from hunger alone. His body was a vessel. Silas gasped, his eyes wide with a desperate plea. I didn't mean to. They made me." His voice was ragged, and as he spoke, his jaw seemed to distend unnaturally, stretching the skin of his face. "Who, Silas?" Gabriel demanded, his hand once again on his blade. "Who made you?" "Valerius," Silas choked out, tears streaming down his face. "Count Valerius! He promised me life, power. I just wanted to live." The horrifying twist. Gabriel had been so focused on Alistair, on Malicor, he had overlooked the creeping corruption right beside him. Silas was no ally. He was a sacrifice, or worse, an unwitting host. "You sold your soul," Gabriel whispered, the words a cold condemnation. Silas's body began to contort. His knees buckled, his legs bending at impossible angles. His back arched, forcing his head backwards, a sickening crack echoing through the crypt. His skin, already pale, began to crack open in thin lines, revealing glimpses of something dark and multifaceted beneath. The flies, now a constant cloud around him, began to burrow into the fissures in his flesh. I can help you," Silas hissed, his voice now a chorus of buzzing wings and hissing static. "Join us! Malicor! He brings release! He brings power!" Gabriel drew his blade. "There is no release in damnation, boy. Only servitude," Silas shrieked. No longer human. His limbs stretched and elongated, his hands transforming into grotesque talons tipped with obsidian-like shards. His eyes, now entirely black, fixed on Gabriel with a hunger that was not his own. The lesser demons within him surged, bursting forth from his skin in a cacophony of buzzing and clicking. He was a living hive, a monument to physical decay, a horrifying puppet of Malakor's insidious influence. "Valerius wants your soul too. Excommunicate." Silas' creature snarled, its voice a chorus of alien whispers. "He revels in your despair." Gabriel knew what he was facing now. Not a man, but a conduit, a vessel. Silas attacked, a flurry of impossible speed and unnatural strength. Gabriel parried, the creature's chitinous claws scraping against his blade, sending sparks flying. The stench of rot and decay intensified, burning his nostrils. The flies, now a thick cloud around the Silas creature, bit and stung, burrowing into Gabriel's exposed skin, leaving behind itching welts. Gabriel fought with a cold, brutal efficiency. He didn't waste movements, striking at the creature's unnaturally bending limbs, aiming for the core of its corruption. He knew he couldn't kill Silas. Not truly. He could only incapacitate the lesser entities possessing him. With a powerful thrust, Gabriel's blade found a soft spot beneath the Silas creature's ribs, not flesh but something yielding and buzzing. The creature shrieked again, a sound of agony and rage, and stumbled backward, thrashing violently. It writhed on the ground, a churning mass of black flies and contorted limbs, before finally collapsing into a twitching, buzzing heap. It was not dead, but it was no longer a threat. Gabriel had to move. He pushed deeper, the stench of decay growing unbearable, the air thrumming with raw, demonic energy. He found the entrance to the Sanctum Inversum behind a cleverly concealed archway, disguised to look like a natural rock formation. The passage sloped downwards, the walls slick with the black oil, the air growing hot and sulphurous. The Sanctum Inversum was a circular chamber, carved deep into the heart of the mountain, built around a gaping fissure that bled raw, crimson light, hell energy, pure and unadulterated. The air shimmered with heat. The walls seemed to pulse with a malevolent heartbeat, and the buzzing of a million flies was now deafening. In the center of the chamber, an altar of human bones stood grimly, polished to a sickening sheen. Chained to it, his face pale and bruised, but his eyes still burning with defiant fire, was Father Alistair. His vestments were torn, his silver cross missing, likely the one Gabriel had received. Surrounding the altar were a dozen cultists, clad in their black robes, chanting in a guttural, blasphemous tongue. At the head of the ritual, bathed in the crimson glow of the fissure, stood Count Valerius. Valerius was everything Gabriel had imagined, and worse. Decadent, arrogant, his features a twisted mask of perverse ecstasy. He was a man utterly consumed by his own ambition, his desire for power eclipsing any shred of humanity. He held an ancient grimoire, its pages bound in human skin, open before him, his voice echoing over the chanting cultists. "The final key, old man!" Valerius shrieked, his eyes alight with madness. "Your pure soul, offered to Malakor, will rend the veil. And then, unimaginable power." Alistair looked up, his gaze locking with Gabriel's. There was no surprise, only a flicker of a sad, knowing smile. "Gabriel," he rasped, "you came." "Always, Alistair," Gabriel growled, his voice low and dangerous. Valerius turned, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Gabriel. "The excommunicate! How did you get in here?" "No matter. You are merely another offering for the Duke of Shards and Flies." He gestured to two cultists, who immediately lunged at Gabriel. Gabriel moved like a phantom, his blade a blur. The cultists, though fanatical, were no match for his skill. He dispatched them with brutal efficiency, their cries cut short as his blade found their vitals. The remaining cultists surged forward, a tide of screaming fanatics. Gabriel met them head-on, his body a whirlwind of controlled violence. He parried, thrust, dodged, his blade an extension of his will. He didn't pray, didn't call on God. He relied on skill, on instinct, on years of fighting horrors that defied comprehension. But as he fought, the fissure behind the altar began to widen. The crimson light intensified, and the air crackled with a grotesque energy. Something was pushing through. A sickening crunch, like a million insects shedding their skin, echoed through the chamber. The black, oily substance on the walls began to boil and bubble. Shards of obsidian-like glass erupted from the stone floor, slicing through the air. And then, it began to manifest. From the gaping fissure, a monstrous form began to emerge. Malachor. It was a Giger-esque nightmare made real. Towering, vaguely humanoid. But its flesh was a constantly shifting, glistening mass of black chitin, jagged broken glass, and an impossibly dense swarm of fat, black flies. Its head was a featureless cowl of obsidian, with two glowing red slits for eyes. Its limbs were elongated, ending in razor-sharp blades of dark crystal. Its voice was not a roar, but the sickening, soul-numbing sound of a million wings buzzing in a charnel house, a sound that burrowed into Gabriel's mind and threatened to shatter his sanity. Malachor's presence was a plague. The cultists closest to the emerging demon began to shriek, their bodies convulsing. Their skin cracked open, revealing swarming colonies of flies beneath. Their eyes bulged, their faces distorting into masks of unimaginable horror. They didn't die instantly. They decayed, their bodies rotting while still alive, their screams choked by the buzzing insects erupting from their throats. Gabriel fought on, his grim determination unwavering. He saw Alistair struggling against his chains, his face etched with terror and pain. He had to stop this. He had to save him. Valerius, oblivious to the horrific fate of his followers, continued his blasphemous incantations, his voice rising to a fever pitch. He was so close to achieving his goal, so consumed by hubris. Gabriel knew what he needed to do. Holy water, prayers. They were useless here. His only weapon was forbidden knowledge. He had to reach Valerius's grimoire. He cut down another cultist, sidestepping a wave of obsidian shards that erupted from the floor. He could feel the flies burrowing into his skin, 1,000 tiny pinpricks of agony, but he ignored it. His gaze was fixed on the grimoire, open on its stand beside Valerius. Malachor was fully manifesting now, its enormous insectoid form filling the chamber with its horrifying presence. The air was thick with the stench of death, and the buzzing of its innumerable components. It turned its glowing red eyes towards Gabriel, and for a fleeting moment, Gabriel felt a mental probe, a searing pain as the demon tried to invade his mind. He resisted, a lifetime of training in mental wards holding the beast at bay, though it felt like his skull would split. Suddenly, a sickening crack. The Silas creature, revitalized by Malachor's near-complete manifestation, sprang back to life. It lunged at Gabriel, its chitinous claws extended, a grotesque parody of the monk it once was. Gabriel met its charge with a brutal, downward slice. His blade bit deep into the creature's chest, tearing through the coalesced mass of flies and fractured bone. The Silas creature shrieked, a dying gasp of buzzing whispers, and collapsed into a rapidly decaying pile of insects and pulpy flesh. This time, it would not rise again. He pushed forward, the heat from the fissure searing his skin, the sounds of decaying cultists, and Malachor's buzzing chorus assaulting his ears. He reached the grimoire stand, kicking Valerius aside with a brutal force that sent the Count sprawling. Valerius shrieked, "No! You fool! You'll ruin everything!" Gabriel ignored him, his eyes scanning the ancient text. He knew every demon had a true name, a word of power that could bind it, control it, even if only for a fleeting moment. He flipped through the grimoire's blood-stained pages, his heart pounding, the buzzing of Malakor's manifestation vibrating in his very bones. There, halfway down a crumbling page, etched in what looked like dried human blood, the true name. A series of ancient guttural syllables that resonated with an unholy power. He gripped the grimoire, his eyes fixed on the manifesting archdemon, which was now towering over Alistair, its razor-sharp claws reaching for the bound priest. "Malakor!" Gabriel roared, his voice raw, fueled by desperation and a grim understanding that went beyond faith. He bellowed the true name, emphasizing each syllable with all the force his ravaged soul could muster. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The archdemon froze. The buzzing of its myriad wings ceased, replaced by a terrible, unnatural silence. Its glowing red eyes snapped from Alistair to Gabriel, filled with an incandescent, ancient rage that dwarfed even the demon's enormous size. It was bound. Not banished, not destroyed, but controlled. For a single agonizing moment, Gabriel held absolute dominion over the Duke of Shards and Flies. "Turn," Gabriel commanded, his voice hoarse, but ringing with newfound authority. "Turn on your master, Malakor! Desecrate the Desecrator!" The demon shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury and defiance. But it was bound. Against its infernal will, Malakor turned. Valerius, who had been scrambling to his feet, stared in horrified disbelief. "No! My servant! No!" It was too late. Malakor, enraged by its binding, by the indignity of being commanded, descended upon Valerius and the remaining cultists with a brutal, cathartic violence. The chamber became a charnel house. Obsidian shards erupted from Malakor's body, tearing through flesh and bone. Its chitinous claws, meant to rip open the fabric of reality, now tore through the screaming cultists. Bodies were shredded, liquefied, consumed by swarms of furious flies that poured from the demon's form. Valerius's screams were cut short as Malakor's enormous, multifaceted hand, composed of 1,000 buzzing insects, closed around him. The Count's body convulsed, then imploded, dissolving into a fine, bloody mist and a final, choked gurgle. The portal, its anchor gone, destabilized. The crimson light flared violently, then began to recede, sucking inwards with a terrifying speed. Malakor, its vengeance sated, its binding still holding, was caught in the collapsing maw of the portal. It roared in frustration, a sound of cosmic fury, but it was being dragged back, its essence consumed by the closing gate. Gabriel didn't wait. He rushed to Alistair, cutting the bindings with quick, decisive strokes. "We have to go, now!" The Sanctum Inversum was imploding. The walls cracked, the fissure screamed, and the raw hell energy, no longer contained, erupted in gouts of green and crimson fire. They scrambled out, the heat and pressure of the collapsing chamber threatening to crush them. They emerged into the cold, clean air of the Alpine dawn, gasping, their bodies aching, their souls scarred. The monastery behind them groaned, then buckled, a final, guttural roar as it was consumed by internal hellfire, collapsing into a heap of smoking ruins. Alistair leaned heavily on Gabriel, his body broken, but his spirit intact. He looked at Gabriel, his eyes filled with a weary understanding. "You did it, son. You saved me. But your faith?" Gabriel stared at the smoking ruins of the monastery, the rising sun painting the jagged peaks in hues of blood and gold. "My faith is dead, Alistair," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "God wasn't here. Only demons. He paused, then looked at his mentor, a grim, knowing smile touching his lips. But I learned their language. And sometimes, that's enough to send them back to the pit. They stood there, two men, one a broken priest, the other a shattered warrior, both forever changed. They were not saved by faith, but by a chilling, visceral understanding that to fight monsters, you must become intimately familiar with their darkness. The cold, clean mountain air seemed to wash over them, but the stench of sulfur and decay would linger in their memories, a testament to the brutal, unholy night. Gabriel looked at his hands, stained with blood and soot, and knew his grim pilgrimage was far from over. He had faced the abyss, and stared into the eyes of damnation. And he had survived, not with God's grace, but with forbidden knowledge, and a will forged in the fires of his own personal hell. And from the ashes of the Ashen Crown, a new, darker path lay before him,